I'm 30 now, and just got married 2 weeks ago. My life was finally starting to feel stable, career going well. I just bought a house with my fiancé, now husband, and for once, things seemed to be falling into place. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at my wedding reception. 7 years ago, my older sister, Lexi, disappeared. One day she was just gone. No note, no message, no warning. She was 25 back then, wild and impulsive, always chasing something bigger than the small town we grew up in. One day she said she was heading to a job interview in the city, and we never heard from her again. At first, we thought something horrible had happened. My parents filed a missing person report. We called hospitals, checked shelters, even posted online for months. But the police found no trace of her. Eventually, after about a year, people started moving on, sort of. My parents split up not long after. My mom blamed my dad for pushing Lexi too hard, and my dad blamed my mom for enabling her chaos. I tried to keep the family together, but I was only 23 and completely lost myself. We never got closure. There was no funeral, no proof she died, just a void. A ghost of a person we talked about less and less over the years. And then, last week, she showed up. Not just randomly. Not quietly. No, Lexi showed up at my wedding. In a white dress. Holding a baby. No RSVP. No warning. Just waltzed in during the reception like she was the guest of honor, smiled like nothing was wrong, and started making her way to our table. Everyone froze. Some people gasped. My aunt dropped her drink. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I hadn't seen her face in 7 years and suddenly there she was, looking older, skinnier, but somehow still Lexi. She walked right up to me and said, "Hey sis, missed me?" I didn't know whether to scream or hug her. I stood up, my mouth open, completely speechless. The room went dead silent. That's when she added, in the most casual voice ever, "We need to talk. It's about him." She tilted her head toward the baby she was holding. And then, she looked straight at my husband. I swear the air was sucked out of the room when she said that, "It's about him," while staring at my husband. Everyone just paused. Like we all collectively forgot how to move. Lexi didn't look upset. She looked calm. Almost smug. And I hated how she was holding that baby like a prop in a soap opera. I couldn't take my eyes off her, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw my husband, Jason, freeze. His grip on my hand loosened. That's when the first drop of panic hit me. Lexi didn't explain. She just turned, walked away from our table, and sat down at an empty one in the corner. Like she'd made her entrance and now she was waiting for Act 2. Some people started whispering. Others stared at me, trying to read my reaction like it was all part of the entertainment. Jason leaned in and whispered that he had no idea what she was talking about. I nodded, but I couldn't look at him. Not yet. My heart was pounding and my thoughts were everywhere. What if this was just Lexi being Lexi, causing chaos for attention? But the baby? That made it different. It added weight to her presence, made it feel calculated. I excused myself and walked across the room to where Lexi was sitting, still cradling the baby like this was some casual brunch. She looked up and said, "We really need to talk. Alone." No apology. No emotion. Just urgency. I didn't want to create a scene, so I told Jason I needed a minute and pulled Lexi into the venue's back hallway. We stood there in the soft glow of a chandelier, the baby starting to fuss quietly in her arms. Up close, I could really see it. Lexi looked tired. Gaunt. Her eyes were dark, not from makeup, but from life. Her once glossy hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her coat had a stain on it. This wasn't the Lexi who left years ago. This was someone else entirely. I didn't even know what to ask first. Where had she been? Why now? Why here? And, what the hell did she mean by "it's about him"? She sighed, rocked the baby gently, and said, "I never meant to come back like this. But I didn't know where else to go." You needed to know. I was shaking. My voice cracked when I asked the one question that kept spinning in my head, "Is that his baby?" She didn't say no. She didn't say yes either. She just looked at me. And that silence? It broke something in me. I backed up like I'd been slapped. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready to hear it. The silence wasn't just an answer, it was a scream. It was 7 years of mystery unraveling in one slow, cruel blink. Lexi finally spoke. She said she hadn't come to ruin my wedding, but that she couldn't stay silent anymore. That the truth would come out one way or another. And apparently, she thought this, crashing my reception, was the best way to deliver it. I asked again, this time almost whispering, "Is that Jason's baby?" She looked me in the eye and said, "Not anymore." But it was his once. What the hell did that even mean? My knees almost gave out. I had to grab the wall to steady myself. My ears were ringing. Everything was spinning. She told me the baby, his name was Luca, was almost 2 years old. Born in a shelter outside Detroit. She said she had no family, no money, and no help. And that the father? He wasn't around. Not anymore. That word again, anymore. She said Jason wasn't in Luca's life, but that he should have been. That he'd known about her for a long time. That he knew Lexi was pregnant back when it happened. And that he made a choice not to be involved. I couldn't breathe. 7 years ago, Lexi disappeared. 5 years ago, I met Jason. 4 years ago, we started dating. And 2 years ago, Luca was born. The timelines overlapped in a way I hadn't considered until that moment. And the implications were a tsunami I wasn't ready to face. I walked back into the reception in a daze. Jason stood up immediately, like he'd been pacing the whole time. He looked worried, genuinely worried, but not surprised. And that scared me more than anything. Because that meant she wasn't lying. I didn't say a word to him at first. I just stared. Waiting. Hoping. Daring him to say something, anything, that would make this make sense. Jason reached out and grabbed my hand gently, trying to pull me aside like we could just talk this out. Like he could explain this in a few words and go back to smiling for photos. But my hand didn't move. It just stayed limp in his. I asked the question flat out, quiet enough for only him to hear. Did you know about her? He didn't even blink. Didn't flinch. He just sighed and said, I thought she was gone for good. No denial. No confusion. Just defeat. My stomach dropped. That one sentence, so simple, so calm, unlocked everything. He had known. About Lexi. About the pregnancy. Maybe not the baby at first, but definitely her. That meant he'd lied to me from the beginning. Every time I asked about his past. Every time I cried about not knowing what happened to my sister. Every conversation we had where I mourned someone who, for all he knew, was still alive. He let me grieve while he kept her secret. Jason tried to explain. Said he'd met Lexi before we got together. Said they weren't serious, just a fling, and that when she told him she was pregnant, he didn't believe her. That she disappeared again before he could get any proof. That by the time he and I were serious, he figured she was long gone. But that didn't explain why he never told me. Not even once. Not even when I cried on our couch for hours on her birthday. Not when I clutched old photos of her and asked if he believed she might still be alive. He had sat through all of that. And said nothing. I felt sick. Like the walls were closing in and the music and laughter from the reception suddenly felt like a mockery. I wanted to scream. To run. To disappear like she did. Instead, I turned away from him and walked right out the back door of the venue. My veil tore on the handle as I pushed through. I didn't care. I sat on the steps behind the venue, dress bunched awkwardly around me, trying to hold myself together while my entire wedding unraveled behind closed doors. Lexi followed me out after a few minutes, still holding Luca. She didn't sit beside me, just hovered like she wasn't sure if I'd hit her or hug her. Honestly, I wasn't sure either. I asked her where she'd been all these years. Why she left. Why she never reached out. She looked tired again, older than she should have at 32. She said she'd left town because of something she could never really explain, said it was a mix of shame, fear, and feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. She'd been couch surfing at first, then got caught up with someone who turned out to be worse than her worst mistakes. That someone turned out to be Jason. They'd met years ago at a party. He was with someone else then, some girlfriend I never heard about, and Lexi said she didn't know about me. She only knew Jason was charming and kind when he wanted something. Said it happened fast, and ended even faster. Said she told him she was pregnant and he laughed. Told her he didn't believe her. Said she was trying to trap him. So she left. Lexi told me she lived in shelters, took odd jobs, and eventually stopped telling people she had family. She felt like she didn't deserve to come back after everything. Especially after Luca was born. She figured she'd missed her chance to fix things with me. That I had a life now. A future. With Jason. It wasn't until she saw our wedding announcement on social media, through a friend of a friend, that she realized who he really was. The same Jason. And that's when she said the panic started. She said she couldn't let me marry him without knowing. Not when he'd already lied to both of us. So she packed what little she had, took the baby, and came back. The question still hanging in the air, the one I couldn't say out loud, was whether or not Luca was his. And Lexi? She didn't give me the answer. Not yet. After Lexi left, I sat alone for a long time. I didn't cry, I couldn't. My body felt numb, like it had locked down all emotion just to keep me upright. Eventually, the noise of the reception faded into nothing, and I realized I hadn't moved in nearly an hour. When I went back inside, the crowd had thinned. Some guests had left early, confused or uncomfortable. A few friends lingered with awkward smiles and quiet hugs, but no one dared to ask what had happened. Jason was nowhere in sight. Someone said he'd left through the front, and no one had seen him since. My parents were sitting together for the first time in years. They looked shocked but weirdly united, like Lexi's reappearance had broken something and mended something else in the same breath. I spent the rest of the night in a fog, going through the motions, thanking guests, smiling for the leftover pictures. But I wasn't present. I was elsewhere, stuck in that hallway with Lexi's words echoing in my head. The next day, I messaged her. I told her I needed the truth, not half of it, not vague answers. I needed to know who Luca's father was, because if it was Jason, then I'd been living inside a lie so big, I didn't even know what parts of my life were real anymore. She replied with just 4 words, "Let's do a test." A week later, we had one. Private, quiet, no lawyers, no drama. Just a swab, a signature, and a gut feeling I wasn't ready to name. Jason didn't even try to talk me out of it when I told him. He just nodded and said, "Do what you need to do." The results came 3 days later. 99.99% match. Jason is the father. Lexi didn't react. She just held her son and nodded like she already knew. Like she'd known the whole time and didn't need a piece of paper to validate what her gut had always told her. I stared at the results for hours. Not because I didn't believe them, but because deep down, I did. After the DNA results, I didn't confront Jason right away. I didn't scream or throw anything. I didn't even text him. I just sat on my bedroom floor for hours, staring at that paper, trying to understand how my life had split in two. There was the life I thought I had, stable, loving, safe. And then there was this. A life where my husband had a child with my missing sister. A life where he lied to my face for years while I wept over a sibling he knew was alive. What kind of person does that? Jason finally showed up 2 days later. He looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, his eyes sunken, like the weight of it all was finally hitting him. He asked if we could talk, said he didn't want to lose me. I let him in, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear whatever garbage he thought might fix this. He told me again how short the thing with Lexi had been. How he was scared when she told him about the pregnancy. How he thought she was lying just to keep him around. He kept saying he didn't know for sure the baby was his. That Lexi disappeared before he could be sure of anything. But none of that mattered. Because even if he hadn't known about the baby, he'd still hidden the one thing that should have never been a secret. He knew Lexi was alive. He looked me in the eye and asked, "But don't you still love me?" And that's when something inside me cracked. Love? What did love even mean anymore? I stood there, thinking about the day we wrote our vows. How I promised to build a life on truth and trust. How he stood there, holding my hands, reciting words that now felt like a cruel joke. He had a son. With my sister. And he stood at that altar like none of it mattered. I told him I needed time. He said he'd wait, but we both knew something was dying between us. And this time, it wasn't coming back. In the days that followed, I didn't answer Jason's texts. I didn't go back to the apartment. I stayed with my mom, because, surprisingly, she was the only one who hadn't asked me to forgive anyone yet. She just made tea and sat beside me. No pressure. No advice. Just quiet presence. And after the week I'd had, that silence meant more than all the apologies in the world. Then one afternoon, I decided to go back to the apartment, not to talk, but to start packing. I knew I wasn't ready to forgive. I didn't even know if I wanted to try. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was layered. It was about Lexi, about the lies, about the way he let me cry in his arms over a sister he knew wasn't dead. I had planned to slip in while Jason was at work, get my things, and leave. But when I opened the door, it wasn't empty. Lexi was there. In our kitchen. Feeding Luca. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked resigned. I didn't know what to say. I stood there frozen, staring at the scene that didn't make sense. The baby spoon. The food. The bib. Lexi told me quietly that Jason had offered them the apartment, said he was moving in with a friend for a while and that they could stay until she got back on her feet. I felt sick. This place, our home, was supposed to be mine. Ours. And now she was living here, like I'd already been erased. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked back out, because I knew if I stayed, I would have said something I couldn't take back. Later that night, Jason texted me again. He said she had nowhere else to go. I thought it was the right thing to do. The right thing. Like this was a fairy tale and he was some benevolent prince handing out second chances. Only I was the one left without a home. Without a husband. Without a sister I could trust. The next day, I went back. I had to. I needed my things, but more than that, I needed closure. I couldn't move on if I left pieces of myself behind in that apartment, behind the closet doors, in the nightstand drawers, under the bathroom sink where I used to keep the extra toothbrush he never remembered to use. Lexi wasn't home this time. Neither was Jason. Just Luca's toys scattered across the living room like confetti from a life I never signed up for. I moved quietly, grabbing what I needed: clothes, documents, the photo albums that somehow survived the chaos. I was almost done when I noticed something. A new picture frame on the shelf by the TV. It wasn't there before. Inside it was a photo. A candid. Jason holding Luca. They were both smiling. Jason's arm cradled the baby like he'd done it 1,000 times. Luca's hand was grabbing his shirt, the way toddlers do when they're comfortable, when they trust you. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a recent photo. It was dated 7 months ago. I stood there staring at it, realizing Jason hadn't just known. He hadn't just suspected. He'd been there. Not just once. Not just as a ghost from Lexi's past, but as a father. He had been visiting them. And he never said a word. All those nights he came home late, all those times I asked him where he'd been and he gave me vague answers, I had believed him. Because I trusted him. I left the picture on the shelf. Didn't smash it. Didn't take it with me. I just walked out, suitcase in hand. And this time? I didn't look back. It's been 3 months. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It's nothing like the place Jason and I shared. No sunlight flooding the kitchen, no balcony, no shared dreams tucked into every corner. But it's quiet. It's mine. And it doesn't smell like betrayal every time I open the door. Lexi reached out once. She said she was sorry. That she never meant for any of this to happen. That if she could take it back, she would. But she also said she wasn't going to apologize for keeping her son. He's the only good thing I have, she wrote. I didn't reply. Jason tried to. More than once. Voicemails, emails, even a handwritten letter he left taped to my front door. He said he loved me. That he made a mistake. That he was trying to do right by everyone. Everyone but me. He asked if we could talk. If we could figure things out. He said he still believed in our future. But here's the thing, sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, trust dies so quietly you don't even notice it's gone until all that's left is a stranger sharing your pillow. I mailed him the signed divorce papers last week. No note. No explanation. Just the silence he gave me when he chose not to tell me the truth. I'm not angry anymore. Not the kind of anger that burns you up from the inside. Now, it's something colder. Sharper. I grieve what I thought I had. But I don't want it back. Not like that. As for Luca? Sometimes I still wonder what kind of child he'll grow up to be. Whether he'll ask one day who I was. Whether Lexi will tell him the full truth. Whether Jason will ever deserve the title of dad. But those aren't my questions to answer. I've started seeing a therapist. I've started sleeping through the night again. I've started finding pieces of myself I didn't realize I'd lost in trying to be the perfect wife to a man who was only ever half mine. This wasn't the story I thought I'd live. But it's the one I survived. And somehow, that feels like a beginning. Not an end.